The encounter, the first drops of rain tapped against the glass of Billionaire's tiny flower shop like impatient fingers. She glanced up from the half-finished bouquet on her workbench, watching as the late September storm transformed from drizzle to downpour in mere seconds. The weather forecast had predicted sunshine all day, another reminder that life rarely followed predictions. Perfect, she muttered, gathering fallen petals into her palm. The 32-year-old botanist had spent her morning delivering arrangements across town, and had hoped the clear afternoon would bring foot traffic to bloom and root. The shop her grandmother had opened 40 years ago. Now, with sheets of rain hammering the sidewalk, she could kiss those hopes goodbye. Prisha tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear, leaving a smudge of soil on her cheek. The shop ledger lay open beside her, red figures dancing across the page. 3 more months of losses like this, and she'd need to close permanently. The thought made her chest tighten. The university where she taught part-time had cut her hours again. Budget constraints, they'd explained with apologetic smiles, as if that made it easier. She'd spent 6 years earning her doctorate in botanical sciences, specializing in medicinal plants, only to find herself struggling to keep her grandmother's legacy alive while her research gathered dust. Lightning flashed, illuminating the empty street outside. In that brief moment of stark white light, Priscilla spotted a figure hunched against the storm, an elderly man in a tweed jacket, lurching unsteadily along the sidewalk, one hand pressed against the buildings for balance. "Sir," she called, though the glass and rain swallowed her voice. Without hesitation, Prisha grabbed her umbrella and rushed outside. The rain was colder than she'd expected, instantly soaking through her thin cotton blouse. She splashed through puddles toward the man who had stopped and was staring at a street sign with profound confusion. "Sir, are you all right?" Prisha asked, holding the umbrella over him. Up close, she could see he was in his late 70s, with wispy white hair plastered to his forehead and rain-speckled glasses sliding down his nose. He turned to her, blinking rapidly. "I seem to have taken a wrong turn somewhere," he said, his British accent crisp despite his evident distress. "Peculiar, really. I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years. Prisha noticed his hands trembling, not just from the cold. "Let me help you. My shop is right there. You can come in and get dry while we figure out where you need to go." "That's tremendously kind, but I don't want to impose," he said, then frowned. "Though I can't quite remember which street. Was it Maple or Birch? I know both. Come inside first. This rain isn't letting up." Prisha gently took his elbow, guiding him toward the warmth of her shop. Once inside, the man removed his fogged glasses, polishing them on his sodden handkerchief. "Professor Edmund Hayes," he introduced himself, attempting dignity despite his dripping clothes. "Retired botanist, or at least I think I'm retired. The days get a bit muddled." "Billionaire. I'm a botanist who specialized in medicinal applications." She handed him a clean towel from under the counter. "You taught at Westlake University, didn't you? I've read your work on indigenous healing plants." Edmund's face brightened with recognition. You have. Marvelous. Not many remember those old papers nowadays." His smile faded slightly, "though I'm having trouble remembering many things myself lately." As Priscilla made tea, Edmund wandered among her plants, occasionally murmuring scientific names with perfect accuracy. She watched him touch a fern with reverent fingers, his eyes clear and focused in a way they hadn't been moments before. "This is Polystichum unitum," he said, "western sword fern. Native peoples used it to treat arthritis pain." "That's right," Prisha said, surprised. "I've been experimenting with modern applications." Edmund nodded approvingly, then suddenly looked lost again. "I should call my grandson. He'll be worried, though I don't recall his number." "Let me help," Prisha offered, passing him the steaming mug. "Do you have a phone? Or perhaps there's someone in your contacts we could reach?" Edmund patted his pockets, looking increasingly distressed until he produced an expensive smartphone. "Theo set this up for me. Said I could press this button if I needed him." He held out the phone, revealing an emergency contact screen. Prisha hesitated before taking it. "May I?" When Edmund nodded, she pressed the call button. It rang 3 times before a deep voice answered, tight with concern. "Grandfather, where are you? I've been looking everywhere." "This is Billionaire. Your grandfather is safe with me at Bloom and Root Flower Shop on Cypress Street. He got caught in the storm." There was a brief silence. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, the voice replied, then added more softly, "Thank you." As Prisha ended the call, Edmund was examining a potted orchid, his scientific mind momentarily overriding his confusion. "Beautiful specimen. You know, these were my late wife's favorites." "They are temperamental," Prisha smiled, "but worth the effort." Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the afternoon. Prisha didn't know it yet, but in helping a lost professor find his way, she had inadvertently changed the course of her own path, one that would soon intersect with a man she had only heard about in university whispers. Theo Hayes, the architectural prodigy who had vanished from public life 3 years ago, after a project collapsed that claimed 2 lives. The storm was just beginning. Parallel worlds. Theo Hayes gripped the steering wheel of his Range Rover, knuckles white as he navigated through the relentless downpour. The windshield wipers worked furiously, barely keeping pace with the torrent. 3 years of self-imposed isolation had made even this short drive into the city feel like crossing a vast, dangerous ocean. His grandfather's episodes had been increasing in frequency. This was the third time in 2 months that Edmund had wandered off. The doctors had been clear: early-stage Alzheimer's, progressing faster than they'd hoped. Theo had converted the garden house on his secluded estate into a comfortable apartment for Edmund, hired the best home health aide money could buy, and installed every safety measure available. Yet somehow, the brilliant professor still managed to slip away during the brief windows when he was alone. Bloom and root, Theo murmured, scanning the rain-blurred storefronts. The flower shop's hand-painted sign emerged from the grey curtain of water, a small, cheerful anomaly among the sleek corporate facades gradually taking over the historic district. He parked haphazardly, not caring about the no-packing zone. The moment he stepped outside, rain pummeled his shoulders, soaking through his expensive cashmere sweater. He barely noticed. The bell above the door chimed softly as Theo entered, bringing with him the scent of rain and sandalwood cologne. The shop was warm, humid with plant life, and startlingly vibrant compared to the monochromatic world outside. For a moment he stood disoriented by the explosion of color and fragrance. "Grandfather," he called, scanning the space. "Back here," a woman's voice answered. Following the sound, Theo found them in a small sitting area tucked behind a wall of ferns. Edmund sat comfortably in a weathered armchair, a steaming mug between his hands, engaged in animated conversation with a woman Theo didn't recognize. She was perhaps in her early 30s, with intelligent eyes and soil-stained fingers. Not at all the type of person his grandfather typically socialized with in his academic circles. "Theo," Edmund's face brightened. "Come meet this extraordinary young botanist. Dr. Nair has been continuing my research on medicinal applications of native plants. Fascinating work." The woman doctor now stood extending her hand. "Priscia," she introduced herself. "Your grandfather has been telling me about your sustainable architecture projects." Theo took her hand, noting the calluses that spoke of someone who worked with both mind and body. "Thank you for looking after him," he said stiffly, uncomfortable with gratitude after years of avoiding human connection. "It was my pleasure. We've had quite the botanical exchange." Her smile was genuine, lacking the calculation he'd grown accustomed to seeing in people who recognized his name. "He's quite remarkable." "Yes, he is," Theo agreed, surprised by her sincerity. He turned to Edmund. "Ready to go home, grandfather? Josephine is worried sick." "Josephine?" Edmund looked momentarily confused. "Your home health aide," Theo reminded him gently. "Ah, yes, the woman who follows me around with vitamins." Edmund chuckled, then turned to Priscia with surprising clarity. "My grandson designed the Singapore canopy, won every architectural award possible before he turned 20. Then he decided to become a hermit." He winked "He thinks I don't notice, grandfather," Theo cautioned, embarrassment heating his face. Priscia studied Theo with new interest. "That Singapore canopy is incredible, integrating living systems into urban architecture. I wrote about its botanical elements in my dissertation." Theo felt the familiar tightness in his chest at the mention of the project. Before he could respond, Edmund stood, wobbling slightly. "I should be getting back to my specimens," he announced. "The Amazonian samples need cataloging." Theo caught Priscia's questioning look. "He retired 5 years ago," he explained quietly. "The specimens are all in university storage now." Understanding crossed her face. "Professor Arzace," she said smoothly, "perhaps you could visit my shop again. I have some rare seedlings coming next week that I'd love your opinion on." Edmund beamed. "Delightful. We'll make an appointment." He patted his pockets. "Should write it down. Where's my journal?" "I'll remind you," Theo promised, guiding his grandfather toward the door. He paused, turning back to Priscia. "Thank you again. Most people would have just called the police." "Most people aren't botanists who've studied his groundbreaking research," she replied with a slight shrug. "Besides, we take care of our own in this neighborhood. It's getting rare these days." Something about her straightforward kindness made Theo uncomfortable. It demanded reciprocity he wasn't sure he could provide. "I should compensate you for your time," he said, reaching for his wallet. Her expression cooled instantly. "That's not necessary." "Please, I insist your grandfather shared knowledge worth far more than money," Priscia interrupted, her tone firm despite her smile. "That's payment enough." Before Theo could respond, Edmund called from the doorway. "Theo, we really must send Dr. Nair some of those orchid specimens from the greenhouse. They're struggling under Josephine's care. The woman treats them like common house." An idea formed in Theo's mind, a way to repay this woman's kindness without offending her pride. "Would you be interested in seeing my grandfather's greenhouse? He has some specimens that might interest you." Priscia hesitated, clearly torn between professional curiosity and caution. "I wouldn't want to impose." "You wouldn't be," Theo replied, surprising himself with his sincerity. "Actually, you'd be doing me a favor. The greenhouse needs expert attention, and my grandfather would enjoy the company of someone who speaks his language." "Well," she glanced around her empty shop, "I could possibly come by next Tuesday morning. The shop doesn't open until noon." "Perfect," Theo said, scribbling his number on one of her business cards. "I'll text you the address." As they walked to the car, Edmund turned to his grandson with a clarity that came and went like sunlight through clouds. "She reminds me of your grandmother. Smart as a whip, and not impressed by fancy titles." Theo helped him into the passenger seat. "You just met her, grandfather. Sometimes you know a kindred spirit right away," Edmund replied, tapping his temple. "Some things I still remember perfectly well." Driving home through the lessening rain, Theo found himself thinking of Priscia's botanical-stained fingers and direct gaze. He'd spent 3 years hiding from the world after the accident, designing buildings that would never be built, carrying the weight of those 2 lives lost when his experimental materials had failed. He'd sworn off public projects, human connections, anything that carried risk. Yet he'd just invited a stranger to his closely guarded sanctuary. Edmund dozed beside him, peaceful now that he was back in familiar territory. Perhaps his grandfather wasn't the only one who occasionally lost his way at home. Theo helped Edmund into dry clothes. His phone chimed with a text message. "This is Pris. Thank you for the greenhouse invitation. One question. Does your grandfather prefer Earl Grey or jasmine tea? I'd like to bring something he enjoys." Such a simple question. Yet it had been years since anyone had asked Theo about preferences rather than specifications or legal matters. He found himself staring at the message longer than necessary before typing his reply. "Jasmine, and thank you for asking." 3 words, but they felt like the first steps onto a bridge he'd thought permanently destroyed. Asterisk. Weathering storms. The October morning arrived crisp and golden, with none of the previous week's stormy temperament. Priscia checked her appearance in the rearview mirror of her ancient Honda Civic before driving through the wrought iron gates of the Hayes estate. She'd opted for practical clothing: dark jeans, a forest green sweater, and boots suitable for gardening, but still felt underdressed for the occasion. The property was breathtaking: 20 acres of meticulously landscaped grounds, surrounding a modernist home of glass, stone, and sustainable materials. The main house seemed to emerge organically from the hillside, its living roof blending seamlessly with the surrounding meadow. It was unmistakably Theo's design, harmonious with nature rather than conquering it. As she followed the winding driveway, Prisca spotted the greenhouse, a crystalline structure that caught the morning light, sending prismatic reflections dancing across the lawn. Unlike traditional greenhouses, this one featured a sophisticated series of panels and angles that likely optimized light exposure throughout the seasons. It was architecture as science, beautiful in its functionality. Theo waited outside, hands thrust deep in his pockets. His tall frame was silhouetted against the glass structure, tension evident even in his posture. Up close, the architectural prodigy looked younger than his 36 years, but carried himself with the gravity of someone far older. Dark circles beneath his eyes suggested chronic sleeplessness. "You found us," he said, his attempt at a smile not quite reaching his eyes. Priscia held up a paper bag. "Jasmine tea and sourdough scones from Bertram's bakery. Professor Hayes mentioned it was his favorite when we spoke." Something in Theo's expression softened. "You remembered. Botanists are good observers," she replied with a shrug. "It comes with the territory." "My grandfather is already inside," Theo explained, leading her toward the greenhouse. "He's been up since dawn, preparing for your visit. It's the most focused I've seen him in weeks." Inside the greenhouse was a marvel of botanical engineering. Temperature-controlled zones housed plants from diverse ecosystems, from desert succulents to tropical orchids. The air was rich with humidity and the green scent of life. Professor Hayes moved among the specimens with purpose, clipboard in hand, momentarily free from the fog that had clouded his mind during their first meeting. "Dr. Nair," Edmund called, waving enthusiastically. "Come see what's flowering today. The Dendrobium chrysitoxum has produced the most magnificent blooms." For the next 2 hours, Priscia lost herself in botanical paradise. Edmund guided her through his collection, describing each specimen with the precision and passion that had made him a legend in their field. Occasionally, his words would falter or he'd repeat himself, but his knowledge of plants remained largely intact, an island of clarity in his increasingly confused mind. Theo observed their interaction silently, occasionally adjusting irrigation settings or making notes about specimens that needed attention. Though he rarely joined the conversation, Priscia felt his constant awareness, his eyes following her movements with guarded curiosity. During a break for tea, Edmund excused himself to retrieve a rare botanical text from his study, leaving Priscia and Theo alone among the orchids. "Your grandfather mentioned you designed this greenhouse," Priscia said, running her fingers along a perfectly angled support beam. Theo nodded. "It was my first independent project after graduation, before Singapore, before everything else. It's remarkable," she said honestly, "the way you've created microclimates without excessive energy use. It's exactly the kind of sustainable design the botanical community has been advocating for." "That was the goal," he replied, his professional passion briefly overriding his reticence. "Using passive solar principles and automated systems to minimize the carbon footprint while maximizing growing conditions. Have you considered applying these principles on a larger scale? Community gardens or urban farming initiatives could benefit tremendously." A shadow crossed his face. "I don't do public projects anymore," Before Prisha could respond, Edmund returned, empty-handed and slightly confused. "I can't seem to find my notes on the Amazonian specimens," he said, frustration evident in his voice. Theo stepped forward. "They're in your apartment, grandfather, remember? We moved your study materials there last month. Did we? I don't recall." The professor's confidence visibly crumbled. Pry Shaw intervened smoothly. "Professor Hayes, I'd love your opinion on something. I've been researching medicinal applications of common garden plants for stress reduction. Perhaps you could share your thoughts over lunch." Edmund's expression brightened. "Fascinating topic. There's considerable evidence suggesting certain volatile compounds in lavender and chamomile interact with neurotransmitters in ways similar to conventional anxiolytics." As they shared a simple lunch in the sunlit corner of the greenhouse, Prisha noticed Theo watching his grandfather with a mixture of grief and love so raw it almost hurt to witness. When Edmund excused himself for a short rest, Theo walked her out to her car. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for treating him with dignity." "He deserves nothing less," Prisha replied. "His mind may be struggling, but his botanical knowledge is still extraordinary." "The doctors say familiar environments and routines help," Theo explained, leaning against her car. "That's why I converted the garden house so he could maintain independence while staying safe. But he still wanders. Have you considered giving him more purpose? A project, perhaps?" Theo raised an eyebrow. "What kind of project?" "Something combining his expertise with structure. Maybe documenting his collection or mentoring students," Prisha suggested. "I could bring some of my research specimens for his input, with your permission." "You'd do that?" "Of course," she said simply. "It would benefit my work too." For the first time since they'd met, Theo smiled genuinely, a transformation that startled Priscilla with its impact. It softened the hard angles of his face, revealing dimples and crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I'd appreciate that," he said, "more than you know." As Prisha drove away, her phone pinged with a news alert. She glanced at it when she stopped at a traffic light, then felt her stomach drop. The headline read, "Reclusive architect Theo Hayes spotted with mystery woman romance or research." Below was a grainy photo of her and Theo standing by a car, his rare smile caught in profile. Over the next 3 days, Prisha watched in horror as the story spread through local news and social media. Speculation ran wild. She was variously described as Theo's new girlfriend, a nurse for his grandfather, or most disturbingly, a fortune hunter targeting the Hayes family wealth. Her name was mentioned, her credentials questioned, her motives analyzed by strangers. Customers began coming to the shop not for flowers but to catch a glimpse of Theo Hayes' new love interest. Some were merely curious, others openly hostile, suggesting she was taking advantage of an elderly man with dementia to access his grandson's fortune. On Friday morning, Prisha arrived to find gold digger spray-painted across her shop window. Fighting tears, she was scrubbing at the paint when a black SUV pulled up. Theo stepped out, his face a mask of cold fury when he saw the vandalism. "I'm so sorry," he said, reaching for the cloth in her hands. "This is my fault." "It's not your fault. Some people are awful," Prisha replied, though her voice trembled slightly. "I should have warned you. The press has been obsessed with my story since I withdrew from public life." He helped her clean the last of the paint. "The accident, my reclusiveness, they've created this narrative that sells papers." "The accident?" Prisha asked cautiously. Theo's jaw tightened. 3 years ago, a residential complex one designed. The experimental green materials I specified, failed. 2 construction workers died. Understanding dawned. "That's why you don't do public projects anymore." He nodded once, sharply. "I can't risk other people's lives based on my theories." Before Prisha could respond, her phone rang the university department where she taught part-time. The conversation was brief and devastating. "They're canceling my teaching contract," she said after hanging up, voice hollow. "Apparently, my personal circumstances have become distracting to the academic environment." "They can't do that," Theo protested. "They can." "I was adjunct faculty, no protection," Prisha laughed bitterly. "All because I helped an elderly botanist who got caught in the rain." Theo's expression shifted from anger to determination. "Come with me," he said suddenly. "Where?" "To fix this," he replied, opening his car door. "Both our problems." Priscilla hesitated, looking back at her grandmother's struggling shop. At the window, now clean of paint but still bearing faint shadow marks of accusation. The flowers inside needed water, orders needed filling, but the media circus would only continue if she stayed. "Let me lock up," she said. Making a decision that would change everything, Priscilla quickly locked the shop and followed Theo to his SUV. As they drove through the city, neither spoke much, both lost in thought about how their simple acts of kindness had spiraled into public scrutiny. They arrived at a sleek downtown building where Theo led her to the offices of Hayes Architectural Innovation. The reception area was minimalist and elegant, though clearly underused. A layer of dust had settled on some of the surfaces. Nora, Theo called to his surprised executive assistant, "Cancel my afternoon, and set up a press conference for tomorrow morning." The woman's eyebrows shot up. "A press conference? You haven't done one in 3 years." I know. Theo turned to Priest. We're going to control the narrative instead of letting it control us. For the next few hours, they worked together in his spacious office. Theo explained his plan. They would announce a collaboration between Hayes' architectural innovation and Priscia's botanical research, a series of community gardens, integrating Edmund's medicinal plant studies with Theo's sustainable design principles. The first installation would transform an abandoned lot near Priscia's shop, revitalizing the neighborhood while creating educational opportunities. But I can't fund something like this, Priscia protested. My shop is barely staying afloat. The Hayes Foundation will fund it, Theo stated simply. My grandfather's legacy deserves to live on through his work, not tabloid speculation about his health. By evening, they had drafted plans, prepared statements, and even sketched initial designs. As darkness fell outside the wide windows, Priscia realized they had worked straight through dinner. You're good at this, Theo said, watching her organize their presentation materials, turning problems into opportunities. Survival skill, she replied with a tired smile. When you grow up with limited resources, you learn to be resourceful. Something changed in Theo's expression. I've been hiding, he admitted quietly. After the accident, I couldn't face the possibility of causing more harm. But hiding hasn't helped anyone, not the families of those workers. Not my grandfather, not myself. Sometimes the most responsible thing we can do is try again, Priscia said gently. With greater knowledge and caution, when they parted that night, something had shifted between them, a foundation of mutual respect and understanding that would prove essential in the days ahead. Foundations. The press conference was surprisingly successful. Theo's re-emergence into public life, coupled with the announcement of the Hayes Community Garden Initiative, redirected media attention from gossip to genuine interest in the project. Edmund's presence on stage, clearly engaged and purposeful as he explained the medicinal properties of the planned garden, silenced questions about his health. Over the following weeks, Priscia divided her time between her shop, now experiencing increased foot traffic from the publicity, and the first community garden site. The abandoned lot was transformed as Theo's team implemented his design's rainwater collection systems, solar-powered irrigation, and ergonomic planting beds accessible to visitors of all abilities. Edmund thrived with his new purpose, cataloging plants and creating informational materials for the educational component of the garden. Though his condition didn't improve medically, having routine and meaning seemed to slow his cognitive decline. One evening in late November, as Priscia and Theo worked late finalizing plans for the greenhouse component, she noticed him watching her with an unfamiliar expression. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. You've changed things, he said simply. For all of us. We've changed things together, she corrected, but her cheeks warmed at his words. Their relationship evolved cautiously, both wary of intimacy for different reasons. Priscia had witnessed her parents' volatile relationship and sworn to protect her independence. Theo had isolated himself so thoroughly that vulnerability felt like a forgotten language. Yet somehow, between soil samples and architectural drawings, between Edmund's good days and difficult ones, they built something neither had anticipated: trust. The community garden opened in early December, drawing neighborhood residents despite the winter chill. Children planted winter greens under Edmund's guidance, while seniors enjoyed the heated seating areas Theo had incorporated into the design. City officials, impressed by the project's integration of sustainability and community enrichment, approached them about expanding to other neighborhoods. On Christmas Eve, Theo invited Priscia to the estate for dinner. Edmund had insisted on preparing his late wife's traditional recipes, with considerable help from Josephine. The meal was simple but meaningful, punctuated by the professor's stories about holidays past, some repeated, but all cherished. After dinner, as Edmund dozed by the fireplace, Theo led Priscia to his study and handed her an envelope. What's this? She asked. Open it. Inside was a deed transferring ownership of the land beneath her grandmother's flower shop to Priscia that had been quietly purchased by a subsidiary company when the building's owner had planned to sell to developers. I can't accept this, she protested. It's quoted, not a gift, Theo explained. It's an investment in our partnership. The shop becomes the retail component of our community garden initiative, selling plants grown in the gardens, hosting workshops. Priscia considered carefully. Equal partnership, she finally said, or no deal. Theo smiled. Those smiles came more easily now. I was hoping you'd say that. Blossoming 1 year later, the Hayes Community Gardens Initiative had expanded to 5 locations across the city. Blumen Route had been renovated. Its space doubled to include a botanical education center where Edmund, on his good days, held court with visitors eager to learn from the famous professor. Priscia's university had awkwardly offered to reinstate her position, but she declined. Her research now continued through practical application in the gardens, and she had published 2 papers on urban medicinal plant cultivation that were gaining attention in the botanical community. Theo had cautiously returned to architectural innovation, focusing on sustainable community spaces rather than high-profile commercial projects. The weight of his past failure remained, but he had learned to carry it differently, as a reminder of caution rather than a sentence of isolation. Their personal relationship had deepened gradually, built on shared purpose and mutual respect. They moved in different worlds. Prisha still lived above her shop, preferring its cozy simplicity to Theo's modernist estate. But those worlds had become increasingly interconnected. On the anniversary of their first meeting, they celebrated the opening of the 5th community garden. This one adjacent to the memory care facility where Edmund had recently moved as his condition progressed. The garden featured plants specifically selected for sensory stimulation, with wide paths for wheelchair access and covered seating areas where residents could safely enjoy the outdoors. During the small ceremony, Edmund had a moment of perfect lucidity. Looking between Theo and Prisha, he smiled knowingly. "You know," he said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "I got lost on purpose that day." Theo stared at his grandfather. "What do you mean?" "I saw her shop from the bus window for weeks," Edmund explained, nodding toward Prisha. Recognized the scientific name she had written on her chalkboard. "Thought to myself, Theo needs someone who understands both beauty and science. So when the opportunity arose during that storm, double quotes, he shrugged mischievously. "Grandfather, are you saying you pretended to be confused?" Theo asked incredulous. Edmund tapped his temple. "Sometimes I'm confused, sometimes I'm not, but I always know what my grandson needs." After the celebration, as twilight softened the garden edges, Theo took Prisha's hand as they walked among the plants they had cultivated together. "Do you think he really planned it?" Prisha asked, still amused by Edmund's claim. "With my grandfather, anything is possible," Theo replied. "He always said botany teaches us that growth happens in unexpected conditions." "Speaking of growth," Prisha said, stopping beneath a flowering dogwood, "I've been offered a research grant to study traditional medicinal plants in rural India. 3 months of fieldwork." Theo's hand tightened slightly around hers. "That's an amazing opportunity." "It is," she agreed, "but it would mean leaving everything here." "Not everything," Theo said quietly. "Some things travel with you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, not a ring box, but something hand-carved from reclaimed wood. Inside was a delicate pendant, a miniature terrarium containing tiny living plants. "What is this?" Prisha asked, lifting it carefully. "A reminder that some ecosystems thrive despite separation," Theo answered. "These plants will live as long as they're cared for, regardless of distance." Prisha understood what he wasn't saying. "You want me to go?" "I want you to follow your research," he corrected. "And I want to be here when you return. Or there, if you'll have me visit." Growth happens in many forms. As the garden lights automatically illuminated around them, one of Theo's energy-efficient innovations, Prisha looked at the man before her, so different from the closed-off architect she'd met during a rainstorm. They had both transformed, not despite their challenges but because of them. Just as plants grow stronger when exposed to wind. "I found something in my grandmother's journal yesterday," she said, fastening the living pendant around her neck. An old proverb she loved: "A kind act can root deeper than the oldest tree." "Your grandmother was a wise woman," Theo said, drawing her closer. "So was yours," Prisha replied with a smile. Behind them, in the memory care facility's common room, Edmund watched through the window, a satisfied smile on his face. Though he might forget this moment tomorrow, right now his mind was perfectly clear. Sometimes getting lost was the only way to find what you truly needed. In helping Edmund cross a busy street during a storm, Prisha had unknowingly crossed into a new life, one where compassion had built the foundation for unexpected joy, proving once again that kindness, like a well-tended garden, always bears fruit in its season.